Okay, folks, we're about to start. You may notice empty bookshelves behind me. That's because all the books had to be removed, and we're doing painting. So, in case it's of interest to anybody, which it probably isn't, that's the reason for this somewhat changing scenery, but it will return to normal soon. Okay. The subject that we are going to be talking about is something that somebody asked me to deal with, which is the idea of the positive in negative thinking. The positive and negative thinking. In other words, everybody has negative thoughts. Question is, what do you do about them, and what use can they be? Of what use can they be to us? And that is what we're going to be talking about. I'm assuming that everybody can hear, right? Is the sound okay? Just give a thumbs up if you can hear. Ooh, yes, okay, fine. All right, good. Okay, so I'm going to start off with a story. This is a story about the Baal Shem Tov and someone who came to the Baal Shem Tov and with exactly that problem that was mentioned, thinking negative thoughts. What are negative thoughts? First of all, negative thoughts could be thoughts that are critical of other people, overly critical of other people where it's not deserved. Negative thoughts could be thoughts that are critical of oneself when it's not deserved. Negative thoughts could be various types of lusts, desires for things that are inappropriate or unnecessary or self-destructive, which really is the proper term to use for all of the above. All those negative things are all self-destructive ultimately. When it says self-destructive, we mean destructive of the soul, obviously. And so on. So there was a person that had these self-destructive thoughts, and he came to the Baal Shem Tov for some advice as to what to do. So the Baal Shem Tov said to him that he has to go and speak to a certain one of the followers of the Baal Shem Tov, or as they call one of the Hasidim of the Baal Shem Tov. He ought to go and speak to him about it, and he will resolve the issue for him. He'll teach him what to do. So the man was very happy. He went off, and off he went to this village. He found out the address and so on and so forth. He went to this village where this disciple of the Baal Shem Tov lived. And he arrived there. It was already evening, towards evening, or it was evening already when he arrived. And he knocked on the door, and no response. He listened carefully, and he could hear that there were people inside, and he could see that there was light inside the room and light inside the house, so he couldn't understand what. So he knocked again, this time a little bit louder. And again, no response. And so he kept on knocking until his knuckles were basically raw, and there's no response, just absolutely no answer. And it was the winter time, so waiting outside this person's door wasn't exactly a pleasant experience. But since he didn't have anywhere else to go, it was just a village. There were no hotels and no motels and no overnight inns or anything that he could stay in. So he just sat down on the porch and covered himself as best as he could with his coat and waited until the morning. Well, morning came and he was almost frozen, but still alive. And the owner of the house opens the door. He welcomes him in. He says, come in, come and drink a cup of tea. Puts him down in front of the fire, and he gives him a nice warm cup of tea. And, warm yourself up, and you must have been chilled there overnight. So he said to him, so after he's drank a little bit of the tea and he's warmed up a little bit, so he says to this disciple of the Baal Shem Tov, well, why didn't you let me in last night? So the disciple of the Baal Shem Tov said to him, well, it's just as simple as that. I didn't want to. And that was the guy's answer. That was his answer. If thoughts are bothering a person, don't let them in. It was a hard lesson to learn, but he learned the lesson. If you don't want them to come in, don't let them in. However, that is not so simple. That is the answer. That's really the way it is. Don't let them in. The question is, how do you not let them in? Well, if anyone is familiar with a book called Tanya, Tanya is a Hasidic work of very, very great importance, especially to Lubavitch or Chabad Hasidim, but it's important to all Hasidim. It's regarded as, in a sense, I suppose you could call it, or it's referred to sometimes as the written Torah, the written teachings of Hasidic teachings. There's written teachings and there's oral teachings. So the basic, just like there's a written Torah and the oral Torah. The written Torah is the 24 books of scripture, and the oral Torah is the Talmud and everything else that goes along with it, that was originally transmitted orally rather than in writing. It came to be written down at a much later stage at the time of the destruction of the Second Temple, because it was afraid that people would, because of the tremendous pressure they were under, and exiles and so on and so forth, and having to deal with a Roman enemy that had just destroyed the temple. So they figured that the best thing to do was to write it down. But before that, it was committed to memory and not to writing. That's why it's called the oral Torah. So the same thing is in Hasidic teachings. There's the oral teachings and there's the written teachings. So Tanya is one of the famous books that is called, I don't recall that there's any other one, but that one is called the written text of Hasidic teachings, Tanya. So in the book of Tanya, he actually discusses these issues at length. It really goes from chapter 26 to chapter 31, 26 to 31. If anyone wants to have a look at a Tanya, you will, I'm sure, find it extremely useful. Let me just get up on the screen 1 second here. If anyone wants, the place to go is, let me just share screen for a second. 1 second, just 1 second. Okay, here we go. Let me share screen. And you will see here, Chabad.org here. Chabad.org. Chabad is the branch of, so here you have your daily Torah study, right? But if you go to learnings and values, so you have texts and writings, Hasidic works, Hasidic texts. Here we go, Hasidic texts. Here is the Hasidic text, and that's the one that you want, the Tanya. Lessons in Tanya is this, either Tanya in plain English or lessons in Tanya. Here we have, it's rendered by Tzvi Friedman, who was a friend of mine. He renders it in very good English, so you can use it. Any one of these will do. But he knows the glossary for the chapter. There's certain kinds of ideas that you have to know, and so on and so forth. But if you look here, chapter 26 to 31 are the chapters that you need in Tanya to be able to answer this question. However, I'm going to give a brief sort of summary of the ideas. Let's just see, someone wrote something in the chat. Yeah, there's several volumes, but the English translation, the free translations that you have online, if you want to buy the book, there's three volumes. There's a 3-volume set translated into English, but you can get the whole thing online for free. So here's one translation. As I mentioned before, there are other translations. There's the more standard sort of translations, or there's Lessons in Tanya translation, which is also very, very good, done by a different friend of mine. And you can have a look. There's another page over there. You go to page 2, and here you have chapter 26. Yeah, so you go chapter 26, 27 to 31. Yeah, all free. So you can copy down these URLs if you want, and use, do the research yourself. Very easy to use, very straightforward. All of the text is, here's the Hebrew text, and this would be the Hebrew text. Obviously, this is the translation. Here's the here's the translation. This is translation. And this here in the smaller print is the commentary. So it has commentary and explanation. It's very well done, and I'm sure you'll get a lot of use out of it. All free. Okay. So there's also, just by the way, while we're talking about it, if you want, there is also, you can search here. You could search for my name over here. I have a number of articles over there. You'll be able to find them. I think it's not, they don't put rabbi for it because everyone's a rabbi. So here, I mean, if you want, I'm not even going into this, but you will find there a number of articles, 63 articles and audio, etc., whatever. So, if all of it for free. Okay, enough tooting my own horn over here. Let's get back to what we're supposed to be talking about, which is the whole concept of the positive and negative thinking. So, we all have negative thoughts, no question about it. We all have negative thoughts, and we all have thoughts that we shouldn't be thinking, probably for a very large part of the day. I wouldn't want to say most of the day necessarily, but hopefully not. But nevertheless, we all have negative thoughts. Thoughts that are self-destructive, thoughts that are about things that we shouldn't be thinking about, self-criticisms, being critical of others, lustful thoughts, etc., 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 etc. What do you do about them? So, there are a number of approaches that we find in the literature. One approach is to self-rebuke, or even better sometimes, get someone else to rebuke you. But that's not very pleasant, and self-rebuke can often land up, it's not pleasant getting someone else to rebuke you, especially that you have to admit what you're sort of have to confess what it is that you've been thinking about. Not everyone wants to do that, so it's unlikely that one will actually follow through on that one. So let's scrap that idea. Although it is a useful exercise sometimes, and they would have, in the old days, they would have actually people going around to communities that were called mochichim, rebukers. Like that was their job. They would get paid for it, right? Communities would, when a rebuker arrived, they would, fork out some money for him, and as a person who's helping them in their spiritual service, and he would spend a couple of days, maybe just one day or a couple of days, rebuking the community at large. Probably not individuals, because that would be, to do that in public would be inappropriate, in fact forbidden. But there is that method. However, that is not the method of Hasidic thought. There are primarily two methods in Hasidic thought. The most important approach is the following. It's based on the verse that is spoken about when Joseph was put in the pit by his brothers. As we know the whole story, Joseph went to, so he was sent by his father, Jacob, Yaakov, to see what his brothers were up to. And when he got there, they had decided they didn't like him too much, particularly because of his dreams. His dreams were that everyone would bow down to him, and they felt that this was completely inappropriate. He was the youngest brother at the time. And his thoughts were his ideas were inappropriate, and they decided to get rid of him. First, they were going to kill him, which they decided eventually not to do. Judah told them, "Don't kill him, but put him in the pit, and we'll sell him as a slave to Egypt," which is in fact what happened. They didn't actually sell him. People found him, and before they could sell him, and they took him down as a slave to Egypt. Okay, so the whole story we know. We don't have to go into it, but Joseph was put in the pit. Yosef was put into this pit. And the verse says over there, the pit was empty. There were no snakes and scorpions in the pit. I'm sorry. The pit was empty. There was no water in the pit. Yeah, that's what the verse says. The pit was empty. There was no water in the pit. So classical commentators have a very sharp eye for these things. And they say, well, if it's an empty pit, if you tell me the pit was empty, obviously there was no water in it. What do you mean? Right? If the pit was empty, there was no water, there was no nothing, there was nothing in it. So no, there was no water in the pit, but there were snakes and scorpions in the pit, from which we learn, we deduce, and people who are familiar with this methodology will tell you that it's meant as an analogy. It's not only meant to tell you what actually happened, that he was put in a pit where there were snakes and scorpions but no water, but also that an empty pit, if there's no water in the pit, there's going to be something else in the pit, right? The pit was empty, there was no water, meaning to say, if there is no water, there's going to be something else. I.e., when a person's mind is devoid of water, it's going to be filled with snakes and scorpions. Right? That's what's going to happen. What do we mean snakes and scorpions? We don't mean literally, obviously. We just mean thoughts that are alien to dangerous thoughts, thoughts that are poisonous, thoughts that are dangerous, thoughts that have no benefit. So if the pit is empty of water, it's going to be filled with all kinds of other creepy crawlies, all kinds of dangerous, poisonous creatures. Which means to say, when one's mind is empty, you're looking for trouble. Now, we know all the Buddhist ideas of empty the mind and so on and so forth, but let's leave that aside for now. I'm not going to discuss that whole idea. It's actually not really the way it works, but the Hasidic approach, or the Jewish approach in general, and the Hasidic approach in particular, is to fill the mind, right? To fill the mind with water. Fill the mind with positive things, and then there's no room for the negative. Fill the mind with light, fill the mind with meditation, fill the mind with subjects on which you can into which you can think deeply, and which are full of positive content. And then automatically, in other words, the pit will be full of water. The mind is like a pit, right? If the mind is empty, it's going to be full of snakes and scorpions. If we fill it with water, the snakes and scorpions can't survive in there. They're going to drown, right? There's not going to be any of those. So, in other words, instead of dealing directly with negative thoughts and trying to push them out and fighting with them, as the author of the Tanya points out, Kol hamanavel imanuvel misnavel, someone who fights with a dirty creature, hand-to-hand combat with a dirty creature, becomes dirty himself. In other words, if you try and fight your thoughts on the level of dirty thought, in other words, negative thoughts, if one tries to fight those thoughts on their territory, you're just going to get dirty. You're not going to win. You're not going to win. You're just you get full of mud, so to speak. And so therefore, we don't fight negative thoughts. We rather introduce positive thoughts and meditate on them. Yes, it's true, the mind will stray back to the negative thoughts from time to time, particularly if there is something that's bothering us, a fear of something, a worry about something, some kind of anxiety or whatever. It will keep on bringing the mind back to it, because the emotions, although ideally the mind controls the emotions, that's the way it's supposed to be, and that's the way a human being was born. A human being was born in a way that the head is over the heart, is over the other organs, either the stomach or the liver. That's why if we just draw, let me just draw a little drawing over here. Let me get a whiteboard. I'm going to get a whiteboard now. Okay. Move this out of the way over here, and I will get the whiteboard, and I'll show you what I mean. in Hebrew, the word for a king is a melech. Again, I'm writing with a mouse, so it's going to be, and I'm writing with my right hand, which doesn't work well with writing with a mouse. I'm ambidextrous, but the mouse doesn't work well with my right hand. So, in any event, that's a melech, right? What is a melech? Mem lamed chaf, right? The word melech stands for moach, which is basically the brain, right? The brain or the mind. And then the lave, the heart, the emotions, right? And then there's the kaf stands for the kaved or the keres, the liver or the stomach. It doesn't matter which one you want to talk about, but let's call it, I don't know, let's just call it the stomach which is, it's really, the liver is the source of, really the source of energy in the body. It's a source of sort of raw energy. It's called the liver. People have problems with the liver, don't have much energy. So the in Hebrew, the mem comes first, right? The moach, the brain, the mind. Then comes the emotions, and then comes the liver, which has to do with action. So that is mind, heart, and action, right? Mind, heart, and action. If one is in this order, if the mind is over the heart, is over the liver, in other words, the mind is over the emotions, is over the actions, then a person is a king. A melech means a king, right? But if it's the other way around, and that's often the way it is, then the emotions rule over the mind and over the actions, right? That's called a lemech. A lemech is someone who can't get anything right. Lemech was actually one of the people in the biblical character called Lemech. He's the one that killed his grandson. He got upset. He shot an arrow. He was blind. He became blind in his old age. And he took his grandson with him to go hunting. And his grandson saw something in the woods, and he said, "Shoot over there, in that direction." He told him, like, he pointed the arrow in the direction. The grandfather shot, and who did he shoot? He shot Cain. Cain, right? And Cain was killed. And in his anguish at finding that he'd actually killed his sort of great uncle, so the grandfather clapped his hands together and squashed the head of his grandson between his hands. So that's someone who's a lemech. He can't get anything right? So there's a biblical story. I don't want to go into it too much, but that's called a lemech, someone who's not really in control of himself. He's full of blunders, right? He's always blundering because his emotions are ruling his mind. So what Hasidic texts say, what we talk about, is what those texts in Tanya say, is that the mind automatically, by virtue of being a human being, your mind should rule your heart. Unfortunately, our education and the way we grow up, and our after many years of not letting our minds rule our heart, or not making sure that our minds rule our heart, often the heart rules the mind, etc., etc. We become very confused. So therefore, in order to rule the emotions, so one uses the mind to rule the emotions. What do? You occupy your mind with positive things, and that has an emotional effect. It has an effect on the emotions. It makes the emotions positive. So if one's having negative thoughts of one sort or another, they're for sure either going to affect the emotions or are being affected by the emotions. Usually negative thoughts are affected by negative emotions. Negative emotions, fear of the wrong thing, anxiety, worry about various things. So we've gone through these ideas on many occasions before. And in the chart of the 10 Sfirot, one of the charts of the Sfirot goes with the soul powers. I'll just show it to you. Sefirot and soul powers. Here we go. This should be it. I have to share screen again. Oop. Here we go. Share screen, yes. Can you see it? Yeah? Okay. So, if you have a look over here, you'll see that's also days of the week over here. I forget about the days of the week. It's not relevant to our particular. So, as you see, the negative emotions, lust and self-love, corresponding to chesed, anger, jealousy, hatred, corresponding to gvura, pride, boasting, arrogance, right? On the negative side, defiance, worry, stubbornness, deviousness, lying, cheating, alienation, loneliness, corresponding to Yesod, and then corresponding to Malchut, meekness, spinelessness, victim mentality, etc. Okay, anyone wants a copy of this, just drop me an email and I'll send you a copy. It's also available on if you go to the website, KabbalahDecoded.com, I believe it's there. If it's not there, there's a link to the Dropbox where you'll find it. Okay, so when a person is not in a good emotional state, so the emotions are going to start running the intellect, and then a person starts having bad thoughts. How do you get rid of it? The way to get rid of it is to force your mind into thinking about positive things. By deep study and discussion. Discussion is a very good way of doing it. Now, I'm talking about here in a general sense. Obviously, every individual has their issues and their challenges that they have to deal with, and sometimes you need help with that because you can't see your way clear, and getting help is not like you have to be crazy to get help. Everybody needs help. In fact, there's a whole system set up in the Hasidic world for spiritual mentors. Every person is supposed to have a spiritual mentor. Someone who you go to for spiritual advice, obviously someone who can keep your trust, your confidence, someone who is beneficial to you, and so on and so forth. So you should have a mentor of one sort or another who advises you in these particular things. Obviously, if the person has a loose slips, you don't want to choose that person as a mentor. Okay, so that is the first way. The first way of dealing with things is to drive out the darkness with light, right? You bring in the light to drive out the darkness. That is the most preferable, that is the preferable way of doing things. There's another way of doing things as well, and that is what is called acharei ha'pu'ulos nimshachim halavavois, that the heart follows actions. The heart can follow actions as well. In other words, if a person cannot get control of their thinking process because the emotions are too powerful, then the emotions, instead of being controlled by the intellect, can be controlled by action. Right? There's a famous book which is called Sefer HaChinuch, the Book of Education. It was actually written by a great sage who kept his name off the book. He didn't even put his name on the title page or whatever it is. It was a book that he wrote for his son for his coming of age, for his bar mitzvah. Right? He wrote this book. It's called the Sefer Chinuch, the Book of Education, and it talks about all the 613 commandments of the Torah and explains them, etc., etc. Now, in one of those essays in this particular in the examination of one of the 613 commandments, actually in more than one of them, he talks about this idea of that emotions can be drawn after action. In other words, if a person is in an emotional state that is giving rise to negative thoughts, it is possible to go and do certain actions that counter those emotions. In other words, positive actions. For example, if one is feeling a tremendous amount of self-pity, for example, right? You're feeling like you're a victim. Just to look at, the corresponding to Malchut. or one's feeling alienation, loneliness, those kinds of things. What can you do as a as someone who is going to act in order to counteract these things? The counteraction would be to go and volunteer for some organization, or maybe not even an organization, just do it yourself. Go and visit people in hospitals or in prisons or in whatever situations, maybe homes for the poor or whatever, or mental asylums are not such a good idea, but perhaps orphanages, things like that. Volunteer every now and then. It's good to do it on a regular basis until one's overcome that way of thinking, and it's even good to continue afterwards as well, but it's just a way of going about it. Volunteer to help out other people who are certainly less fortunate than you are. People who are real unfortunate and have misfortune, and one's perspective on these things changes very quickly when you see people who are really in dire circumstances. People who are terminally ill, people who are indigent, down and out. They don't have any, hope for the future in terms of finances, whatever, this kind of thing. People in prison. By spending time and giving of yourself to them and helping them out and talking and being a friend to such people, one quickly loses the perspective of self-pity and so on and so forth. There are many other, that's just one example. There are many other examples, and the heart is drawn after one's actions. That's a second way of dealing with it. The thing you don't want to do is to go into hand-to-hand combat with your negative thoughts, because A, it's not going to work, and B, you just confuse yourself. The best thing to do is to kind of ignore those thoughts and go on to positive ones. Try and engender positive thinking, and that's the best way of going about it. If that doesn't work, then you go to positive action. And if you feel that positive action is easier for you to start off with, so you can go that way also. That's also fine. And that is the way that we deal with negative things. So what's the silver lining in these things? In other words, what is the positive in negative thinking? The positive is that a person comes to much greater self-understanding, and he reaches greater heights. The reason that you're having these negative thoughts, says the Baal Shem Tov, actually, the reason that you're having these negative thoughts, it's being presented to you as a challenge in order to overcome. It's a challenge for you to overcome, and once you've overcome these kinds of things, once you've overcome them, you will find that you'll be a better person for having faced such a challenge and overcome it. The purpose of being challenged in life is to go to a higher level. If you go through life without challenges at all, and you retreat into your safe spaces or something like that, then you haven't dealt with a challenge. The way to deal with challenge, with adversity, is to go higher than the adversity. This is actually, again, a Hasidic aphorism or a saying, which is called lechatchila ariber. From the outset, go over the top. In other words, as the expression goes, some people, when they face a problem, they try and go around the problem, right? Skirt the issue. Doesn't work for long. Other people duck until the bad situation is over. Also not going to work for very long, and it doesn't always work at all. Sometimes you have to keep on ducking your head for far too long for it to be productive. And the right approach is, from the outset, my attitude is, I'm going to overcome. I'm going to transcend this. I'm going to jump over it. I'm going to jump over the hurdle, right? I'm going to jump over the wall. I'm going to jump over the problem and reach a higher place. Doesn't mean to say I'm not going to face the problem. I am going to face it, but I'm not going to fight the problem hand to hand, right? I'm not going to dismantle the wall brick by brick. I'm going to jump over it from the outset so that it's behind me, put it behind me. That's the way to do it. Of course, again, as I mentioned before, for individual advice, so best ask your spiritual counselor. If someone doesn't have a spiritual counselor, get one. If you can't find one, I'm always available. And you can ask for advice from yours truly or from other people. Very often friends, close friends, good friends are very willing to help. So that is the way we deal with negative thinking and how we come to the positive out of it, because you get to a higher place, you get to a better place, you get to be a better person as a result. So, ladies and gentlemen, are there any questions?